This is the reliquary figure of Saint Foy, and it is enamel over wood. So it's a wood statue, but that's covered in enamel, gold, and silver, and then also a bunch of different gemstones, which I'll talk about in a little bit. It is approximately 33 and a half inches tall, which is just a little less than 3 feet tall. Um, Oops, I think I meant to say 33 and a half inches, which is less than 3 feet tall. Sorry. Which would put it about the size of a 2-year-old, maybe a 2.5-year-old. And to define reliquary, it means a vessel that contains the remains of a saint. And for this case, it is the remains of a young girl, Faith, who was martyred in the early 4th century for not participating in a pagan Roman ritual. And then all the jewels that you see are added by the pilgrims that came to see this reliquary over time. So let's see, pilgrims arriving in Conch, they basically had their one thing in mind is to see this reliquary or this box or the statue that held the remains of this saint. And this one was so famous that it was originally located in a monastery in Agen, but the monks at Conch plotted to steal it in order to attract more wealth and visitors. So the reliquary at Conch, it's going to be basically stolen so that it could be used to attract pilgrims at this new church in the city of Conch. So anyway, going back to this Christian convert living in Roman-occupied France, at the age of 12, she was condemned to die for her refusal to sacrifice to pagan gods. So she was revered as a martyr or someone who dies for their faith. So Saint Foy was a very popular saint, particularly in southern France, and her relic is extremely important to this church, which brought pilgrims and wealth to the small and isolated town of Conch. So the pilgrims on their way to the Compostela de Santiago would go and make sure that they came to this church in order to view this reliquary figure. The purpose of the statue was to hold and contain relics, and then pilgrims would come and pray before the relics of the saints. The relics are usually encased in these what's called precious reliquaries. And typically people who were contained in these, it could be a piece of hair, it could be ashes, it could be bones. It kind of depended on which saint you were talking about. But the more important the saint, the more important the town was. And so the things that were the boxes or the containers that were holding the reliquaries, they could be very simple, but this one was made to be much more elaborate into the shape of a body or body part. So Christians prayed to them so that they would intercede with God on their behalf, and prayers that are made in close proximity to the saint were considered especially effective. Now, the date of this reliquary is unknown. Bernard of Angers first spoke of it in about 1010, and at first Bernard was frightened that the statue was too beautiful, and he was concerned about the idolatry, or that pilgrims would begin to worship this jewel-encrusted reliquary rather than what the reliquary was supposed to contain or represent. So, and over time, the travelers did pay homage to the Saint Foy by donating gemstones for the reliquary, so that her dress is covered in stones such as agates, amethysts, crystals, carnelians, emeralds, garnets, hematite, jade, onyx, opals, pearls, rubies, sapphires, topazes, antique cameos, and intaglios. Her face, which stares boldly at the viewer, was originally to have been the head of a Roman statue of a child. So the reuse of older materials and new forms of art, we know that that's called spolia. And using spolia was not only practical, but it also made this object more important by associating it with the past riches over the Roman Empire. Okay, so in the 11th century, there were many different crypts, chapels, and passageways that gave people access to relics kept in churches. And churches would later decide that every altar required a relic, and then because of that, relics were then subdivided, which multiplied the number of relics and reliquaries. For example, there are supposedly hundreds of churches that hold relics of the cross that Christ was crucified on. And owning these relics increased the prestige of the local church and community. So churches went to great lengths to acquire them, including theft, which is probably what happened here in Conch. And so this could be an example of one. So this is definitely, it contains the bones of the saint, and it was considered holy robbery of the new owners, and then they encase it in this new elaborate reliquary. And so it has a wooden core, but with gold and jewels on the outside. And so this type of reliquary, or taking the form of a saint, was quite common in the region of Conques, France. And then even today, people make this long trek out to Conques to pay respect to Saint Foy. And then there's also every October a great celebration and procession is held for Saint Foy, which continues this medieval tradition into present day devotion. And so, covered in gold with lots of different types of gemstones left by pilgrims. It's a beautiful example of medieval sculpture at the time, and it's probably the largest Romanesque sculpture that has survived through modern day.